You're watching Economics Amplified, the latest thinking on the biggest issues from UChicago's Becker Friedman Institute.
All right, so we originally toyed with naming this talk. I thought that person was an idiot, but the muffin made some excellent points. And what I'll eventually get to is a circumstance in which someone would utterly and completely discount information, say, about a product or service provided by a person, because persons are horrible, but believe the message delivered by a talking something or another, because they're terrific, those talking something or anothers. And that's this talk with this long name. To me is Rima Tillery. Rima was a PhD student here, is now on faculty at Kellogg. But before I get into this, I'll need to give you a little more background on anthropomorphism. So let's do the talk within the talk first and give you an overview of anthropomorphism research in marketing. And I'll review more work than just done here with Pankaj Agarwal and Sarah Kim, but they're frequent co-authors, so they'll lend flavor to all of this. So what's anthropomorphism? First of all, pick an area of research that you can type in, say, 4, maybe 5 letters. My life consists of typing and retyping this word over and over and over again because it is not typable. The reason you find yourself stumbling over it is you probably took anthropology in college and you called it anthro, and so you want anthro to be the prefix. It's not. Anthropo is the prefix, and it means human, and morph is form, so anthropo, human form, morphism. And it's giving non-human things humanity, at least some humanity. And we can give them traits, motivations, behaviors, and the field is a little bit loose about how much you have to give to count as anthropomorphism, and we'll eventually get into that. It is a pervasive human tendency. If you've seen talks by Nick Epley, who studies anthropomorphism on the psychological side, he looks very heavily on the antecedents, the precursors that cause people to anthropomorphize. We're not going to look at that here. What we're going to do is, if I get you to anthropomorphize for some reason, what are the subsequent consequences of that? It is very, very common to see anthropomorphized entities in various forms in advertising. For example, people will use shape to come up with things. So here are the Christmas carolers, the happy family in the right and the lower left quadrants. Here's a nice looking couple there, good old Bacardi and Coke. They've been together for years. Faces are everywhere. It's peculiar. You'll find things on websites that will point you to different faces all over the place. And these are intentionally done, sometimes by marketers. Designs of cars will put faces into them. Sometimes you'll just use a face in an advertisement. Other times they're entities, characters of some sort. The Michelin Man, the M&Ms. The one on the right doesn't look like a person, but it's named the sidekick. And in all its messaging, it's described in human terms. And that's a real live vending machine that comes up to you in Japan. It will walk up to you on the street and offer you a Coca-Cola. Anthropomorphism is very, very common in health-related messages. I haven't dug into this nearly as much as I like, but it's really important. You don't overcome cancer, you fight it back. Cancer, you didn't beat me. I'm going to take over. This is cholera in the middle. Sharon Stone depicted a stroke. The small text on the heavier set woman says, obesity finds it hard to overtake someone who's running. And the cigarette is choking you up there in a Russian ad. We see it quite a bit. Now, what we'll eventually get into much later in the talk, and we'll pick up on the Sharon Stone thing, is where the messenger in the advertisement, the thing speaking to you, is an anthropomorphized entity. Here, it's a little bit quirky because it's a real person taking on the role of the stroke. That's going to be a little too complex for us to handle yet. You, of course, remember from when you were younger Mac and PC. This is very popular now. Mayhem, the Allstate ads that depict mayhem. This, which you probably can't read very well because I took it with my iPhone, it's from a bus stop. It's a picture of a sundress, and it says, "I am light, I am airy, I am your sundress." So apparently at some point your outfit can start talking to you. We certainly know this guy, Mucus. He's less of a spokesperson than just a character. And these, which I'll probably show you again, but let's get in the spirit of things. So these are pretty common. Why would you do that? Why would you put the muffin in the advertisement instead of having a voiceover or another person do it? Well, one reason might have nothing to do with anthropomorphism. What you try to do when you create an advertisement is to get people to pay attention to it because they don't want to. And if you get them to pay attention to it, you want them to just listen to what you have to say and not counter-argue what you're saying. So what you see most of the time in creative ads are efforts to reward you for paying attention and to cut down on the counter-arguing. So people put humor into things or drama into things to keep you from doing that. And that's certainly one of the main reasons why regular practitioners put in anthropomorphized entities in ads. But there are effects more specific to anthropomorphism, and let me walk through three categories of them. The first of them are metacognitive effects. Metacognitive is thinking about thinking. And I'll show you these in a second, but this falls in the category of anthropomorphism as a metaphor. People don't actually think the entity is human. There are just pleasing effects of the anthropomorphism. Let me show you that in a second. More interesting are the cases where people start treating the entity as if it were really human. If you called their attention to the fact that they were doing it, they would be like, "Oh my God, I'm doing this. That's not a real person. Why am I doing this? I'm going to stop." But the effects happen in a non-conscious way and drive them. And the third case is we start giving non-human things genuine, in our mind, humanity. It has a mind. It has feelings. You can hurt it. So let's walk through each of these. What are metacognitive effects? Metacognitive effects happen all the time, not just with anthropomorphized entities. And what happens is when you're processing information and making a decision, concurrently your mind is kind of keeping track of how that went, these thinking about the thinking process. And these thoughts about the thinking processes, these metacognitive effects, can spill onto the thing you're evaluating. So, for example, fluency effects, and this is not an anthropomorphism effect. Fluency is ease of processing. So if you're processing an advertisement, you're reading an advertisement on your computer, or you're otherwise processing a persuasive message, and it's easy, you're processing the message, and your mind is keeping track, and it's comfortable and easy to process it, you will be more likely to believe that message, or you will evaluate the thing that the message is about more positively. The feeling of ease feels good. You don't know this is happening. You just know you're reading a message or reading a speech, and it feels good. And you naturally misattribute that positive feeling to the thing that you're evaluating. So things in icky font feel less true, and the ad it's about, the product seems less good, the service seems less good. So it's a common enough phenomenon that how we process gets stuck on the thing we're processing. Early work with Pankaj Agarwal and I said, maybe that's all that's happening with anthropomorphism. Maybe it's just a schema congruity effect. So let me show you, this is an earlier paper, and you notice I say earlier, 2007. Anthropomorphism research and marketing is remarkably new for how common it is in advertising. It was one of those things that was there, and we weren't paying a lot of attention to it. There was some work on brand personality, but otherwise not much. So what Pankaj and I said is, I suspect a lot of the positive effects for anthropomorphized messengers is as a consequence of people getting the fit with an activated schema. That if I say, think about something this way, and you say, okay, I'll do that, And then I present the thing you're supposed to think about that way. So I activate a schema, say, think about it as this sort of thing, and I present it, and you're like, I don't see it. Why is it this sort of thing? That feels bad and will influence your evaluation. By contrast, if it feels good, I get that. That snick of pleasure in your mind affects the evaluation. So let me say this. Let's say there's an ad that says, here's our family of flavors. We're introducing this new line of beverages. Here's our family of flavors. And the resolution was actually better in the studies. And then we ask, what do you think of this new product offering? Are you likely to try it? What would be your willingness to pay for it? People are meh about this. Like, okay, that's fine. If instead we show it this way, here's our family of flavors, and there it is, don't you feel your mind going, snick, I see it. There's the big one and the little one and the older brother and the little brother. And unbeknownst to you, that sort of, I get it, affects your evaluation. And indeed, in the studies that we ran, people were more likely to want to buy this one. They thought it was a better market entry. It's a much better product. But you notice here that there's nothing really human about these. It's more of a, oh, that's cute. I get it. It's purely a consequence of this pleasure or displeasure in the evaluation of this. There were another version of this where we said, here's our line of flavors, and then this one was evaluated more positively than this one. So people match up to the schema. Okay. Those are sort of fun, but they're a little boring. Now, let's talk about it when people start doing odd things. Think about the way your mind is organized as a very dense, three-dimensional spider web of interconnected associations and nodes, part of which is turned on at any one time. It's like software preloaded in your head. Now, some of the software in your head is how to behave around people. What are the standards of evaluation around people? What are my goals for reaching there? What are the norms for proper ways to behave around them? And you learn these over time, and they're in your head. If I can turn those on, those social related, this is a person, so it should behave in a social manner. If I can turn those on, even though you don't know I turned them on, you can start behaving towards non-human things just as if they were people. So Jesse Chandler and Norbert Schwartz at Michigan did this. They had people either think of a product like their car or a couch in human terms, and then they found out, are you going to throw it away or keep the couch? If the couch is old and worn and frayed, and you haven't anthropomorphized it, they're like, get rid of it. It's old and it's worn and it's frayed. If they anthropomorphized the couch, they were less likely to dispose of it, and they were a little offended that you asked. What kind of loser would put an old friend, especially when they're sick and tired, in the back alley for some stranger to take them away? That's completely horrible behavior. There's a delightful ad from IKEA that just mocks us all for this. Now, another set of that we did on this, and this is work with Pankaj, you've probably heard, I know those of you who've taken my class have heard this peculiar phenomenon. If I turn on outside conscious awareness, a social group, it will affect your behavior. It's called automatic, that word's meant to pick up the non-conscious effect, behavioral priming. I turn on part of that three-dimensional spider web that says, how should I behave in this circumstance? And I can get some unusual effects. So in some of the original studies, they turned on the social category of the elderly, and then they later timed how quickly people walked. And people who had the concept of the elderly turned on walked more slowly than the control group did. So now the original version of that research was people thought, well, if you turn on the elderly, that jumps over to the association of physically infirm, which jumps over to the association of slow walking, and thinking is for doing. More recent research says, no, what's happening is when you turn on a social group like the elderly, what comes online is your goals for a successful social interaction with somebody in that category. You've got preloaded your goals for this social phenomenon. And the researchers who posed that, this is Joseph Cesario and some co-authors, came along and said, let's see what happens. Let's measure whether people like or dislike the elderly. And yes, indeed, people who like the elderly, if you prime it, turn on the elderly, and they don't know it's been done. They're not adjusting their behavior. It's turned on outside of conscious awareness. So those who like the elderly slow right down because you like the elderly, so your job, your goal is to have a good conversation with grandma. If you don't like the elderly creep you out, these people, when you turn them on, are just pick the pace right up. Let's just get completely away from grandma. I never liked her. She's mean to me. So Pankaj and I said, I bet we can get that to happen with brands as well. So in these studies, we have anthropomorphized brands, and here we had people write essays. Think of Volvo as if it's a person. What would Volvo be like if it came to life? And the non-anthropomorphized version. Or think of Krispy Kreme as if it came to life, or Kellogg if it came to life. As you did that, and then we measured whether people behaved in alignment with the brand imagery or against the brand imagery. And yep, if you anthropomorphize Kellogg, which has the association of healthfulness, and I later find out if you wait for the elevator and it's kind of crowded, or if you run up a flight of stairs, people who've been primed with Kellogg, but only if it's been anthropomorphized, are more likely to run up the stairs. By contrast, if I've primed you with Krispy Kreme, and I then send you out later, you will stand around like a complete and total slug waiting for the elevator to come. But remember, this doesn't happen. This is not just the concept of Kellogg is healthy and Krispy Kreme is unhealthy. That had no effect. If we just say, tell me all about Krispy Kreme, or tell me all about Kellogg, had no effect on their health behavior. But if Kellogg is a person, how do you picture the person? One of these bouncy little personal trainers who's just all full of things, and you like them? Well, then you're going to be bouncy and energetic too, because it makes it easier to get along with them. And your friend Krispy Kreme, what is your friend Krispy Kreme like? Well, taking the stairs is rude. You've abandoned your sluggish little friend Krispy Kreme if you want to hang out effectively with Krispy Kreme. So you get these. And a third version of this is Frank May and Ashwani Manga did some work on anthropomorphizing time. So if you think about time as having power and intention, it turns out that people who are very low in social power feel the passage of time in an extremely aversive way if time is seen as human, because they feel like time is having its way with you and grinding you under its thumb. So nobody likes to wait, but low power people really hate to wait for something to come, like you're waiting for a delivery, especially if time has been humanized. Now, that time paper followed on some work done by Sarah Kim and myself. So what we were looking at is how people will behave toward risk-bearing entities. So in a couple of studies, we had slot machines. So the slot machine carries some risk. And the question is, are you going to pull that handle and gamble with the slot machine or not? And the other one, we described a disease, particularly it was a skin cancer. Would you catch it? You know, are you likely to succumb to skin cancer? And if you did, how serious would it be? And so you either have the risk-bearing entity anthropomorphized or not. So for the machine, I'll show you in a second. For the disease, we describe the disease as a dangerous class of ailments. So that's just a disease. Or we describe the disease as part of a criminal family. They were like the mob of skin cancer. And so you're going to see either the anthropomorphized version or the non-anthropomorphized version. And we ask you to write a little essay to turn on some kind of feelings of social power. In the high social power, you wrote a paragraph or so. Tell me about a time in life when you had authority and control over others. You controlled the resources, you controlled others' behavior. That's the high power condition. In the low power condition, you wrote an essay about when somebody had power over you. And you did that. Okay. So that's a commonplace, the folks who study power, that's a commonplace way to manipulate things in the lab. So you're going to see, here's the slot machines. You're either going to see the one on the left, which is just very slightly anthropomorphized. You can see just the little bit of a face up here. And at least to me, this looks like a dumpy little person. The one on the right is just a slot machine. Okay, now it's very hard to simulate in your mind what it's like to be in a study, but just for a moment, make yourself feel large and in charge. You're the boss. People do what you tell them to do. Do you want to gamble with this slot machine? People do. They sort of feel like that's a little person, and I'm a big, powerful person, and it's going to give me what I want. If you feel sort of small, people boss me around, they have their way with me, do you want to gamble? Nah, it's going to deny you what you want. By contrast, you feel large and in charge and you boss people around. Do you want to gamble? Doesn't seem to be relevant here, one way or another. And that's exactly what we find. High power people believe they're much more likely to win if the machine looked human. They gambled more, were much more willing to gamble. Low power people believe they were less likely to gamble with the machine. Perhaps more disturbingly, and for longer term consequences, people believed if they were high social power and the disease were presented in human form, they didn't feel like they should worry about it. They were less likely to want to use sunscreen. They were less worried about it because, so all this cancer, you're not going to get me, that seems like maybe a benign ad technique to get people to pay attention, or that sort of thing might get people to fight harder and keep their spirits up. The worrisome thing is this suggests that people who feel high in social power feel wrongly that they have social control over the disease because the disease exists in the social, not the scientific world. It exists in the social world because it's been humanized. Okay, so all of which is to say people inadvertently transfer all these ideas about how the social world exists onto the anthropomorphized entity. It's interesting, it actually might go in the other direction as well. In a different study, we gave people this slot machine, which is ambiguous. It doesn't have a face. It's just the slot machine. And remember, people are either in the high power condition or the low power condition. So we either had them win all the time, or most of the time, or lose most of the time. And then we said, think back, what did your slot machine look like? The people who were high power, I'm large and in charge, people do as I say, and won a lot, thought the slot machine looked a lot like the person. Because the outcomes I was experiencing were like the social world. I got my way. And where do I get my way? From people. So the slot machine must have been a lot like a person. By contrast, if you were low in social power and you lost all the time, yeah, that's about right. People are mean to me. They thought the machine looked more human. So those are all sorts of effects we've talked about in the past. But what about the talking muffin? What about trust in the differential influence of humanized and non-humanized entities? So I won't show you the muffin again, but recall that the muffin explains to you pretty carefully that new and improved Pam will help you get things out of your cooking pans quite readily. Why would you believe the muffin or the car And what we've suggested is it is precisely because these things are not fully human that you might be more likely to believe them. That humanity is the problem player in all of this. So the thing to remember is when you anthropomorphize a muffin, the thing that catches our attention is the muffin has gone from object to a sort of human-like object. The muffin has picked up the ability to speak, it's got a little face, it's got a mouth, it even seems to have emotions. OMG, Dad! The whole thing seems to have gained humanity. It has. But the gap from muffin up to humanized muffin is maybe not the difference of research interest here. It is in the other studies we did, the humanized versus non-humanized couch, the humanized versus not humanized slot machine. What's critical here is from the decision standpoint of the advertiser. They've removed the human speaker and put in this partially human speaker. So as we go on this one, here's the gap we've been interested in the past. As we go from the non-human to the anthropomorphized entity, which Rima and I in shorthand were calling anthropomorphs. It's not a word, don't use that. But most of the other work has been interested in this gap between the non-human and the anthropomorphized entity. But from an ad standpoint, using a talking muffin is to choose to use something other than a regular human being. And removing the humanity, and it's not that we're adding humanity to the muffin, but we're taking some humanity away from the regular human spokesperson. And that might matter a whole lot. Now, this is way too shorthand for this, but the way we come to believe things is an interesting process. Things don't arrive in our brains neutral, and then we decide if we believe it or disbelieve it. It turns out that in the process of comprehending something, just to get this process started, it is automatically true. And then disbelief is a high effort process to undo that. So this is why don't hang out with idiots, never speak to your brother-in-law, because things come in and they are true. And then you have to work hard to decide, oh wait, my brother-in-law is an idiot and that was the worst argument ever. This can't be true. Things get into your head just in the process of comprehending them. It's not up here, but another thing to watch out for is something called the sleeper effect. I don't know if you've seen this in studies, in other classes. The sleeper effect is this discomforting notion that when you first hear something, you take into account the source of the message. And you may discount something as being untrue because you know the person speaking to you is biased in some fashion or just not accurate in some way. So you read something in some horribly biased political magazine, and you're like, well, that's ridiculously untrue. The sleeper effect is in your sleep over time, you remember what you read, but you don't remember where you read it. So nonsense gets truer in your head as you go on. So be careful the company you keep. So there's this whole body of research, it's enormous, that deals with source credibility effects and how people come to bring a message in and then set the message down. What are the things that turn on this effortful process of disbelieving? And most of them are situational. But there are some individual difference, and that's referred to as the individual's level of interpersonal trust. There's a scale for it. It's called the Rotter scale, named after the person who came up with it. This is a fairly stable personality characteristic. You can move people around on it given the situations. But there are some people in life who are high trusters. You tell me something, I think, yep, that's probably true. I like people, I trust them. There are other people at the low end of the continuum, low trusters, who think people are scum and are always lying to them. You know the old joke. This was originally a lawyer joke. How do you know a person is lying? his or her lips are moving. It was always said with respect to lawyers. For some people, this is always true. If your lips are moving, you are lying to me. I don't trust people in the least if you are low on the interpersonal trust scale. So the point, of course, is just being human renders some people unworthy of trust. Well, you know where this is going. How do I deliver a message to these people if they don't trust people? Anthropomorphized entities. And so here are the hypotheses of the studies with Rima Tillery. The effect of the messenger type on persuasion, we said, would be moderated by interpersonal trust. For people low in interpersonal trust, they are vigilant. They are wary in the marketplace. They are keenly attuned to who's talking to them. And if it's a person, they discount them. I've grayed out what we're going to do with high trust. But let me explain it here. So low trust participants, and we're going to measure this. We're not going to make you low trusting or make you high trusting. You can do that. There's manipulations in the lab to turn on trust. But we're just going to measure it, your chronic tendency. The people who are low in trust, we think, will notice the messenger. And if the messenger is a person, they will turn on that disbelieving mechanism. They will work hard and say, I don't believe it, and that argument is silly, and they will discount it. But the anthropomorphized messenger, they won't pony up the effort needed to disbelieve because they don't have to. It's not a person. It's humanity that triggers the high effort. And it's because they think other human beings are trying to get one over on them. The high trust participants, and here's the more formal statement of it, but let's just do it here. The high trust participants are unaffected by whether it's a talking muffin or a talking human, because they're just blithely going through life, happily trusting. They don't even notice who the messenger is. If I bother to get them to, if I push them, look who's talking to you, at that point, they're more persuaded by the humanized messenger. They like people. And talking muffins seem a little suspicious, after all. And so this idea of mediation, and I won't push this here, but in studies, what you'll do is you'll say, I think I can move this around, like anthropomorphism, and I think it'll interact with something like interpersonal trust, and that'll affect this later measure called persuasion. And you'll do studies that will just measure, I move this around, that's my independent variable, and then I get responses on my dependent variable. You can also take intermediate measures, because we think that if I move around trust and anthropomorphism, it influences the perceived goodwill the speaker has toward me, and that goodwill is what in turn causes the differences in persuasion. And there are statistical tests for mediation. So that's why we have this process, by perceived credibility or perceived goodwill. Okay, so we didn't use muffins. We had talking dental floss, we had talking lamps, and we had talking coffee cups. And these are print ads. We didn't do talking animals, too complex for us so far. So if you're in this study, you come into the lab and you say, we're studying people's responses to messages, because we are. At the end of the experiment, we will give you this multi-item set of questions that constitute Rotter's interpersonal trust scale. And that will be a continuous variable. You'll either score very high in trust, middle, or very low in trust. And you will have one of these two versions of the ad. One, the anthropomorphized, and these are very subtle, will describe it in person terms. It's a great ally. It's got little eyes here and a little mouth. Can you guys see it on either end? Yep. And Max, speaks in first person. This is where I come in. I'm Max Floss. If you're in the non-anthro condition, you heard that he's a great tool as opposed to a great ally. And we speak about him in third person. That's where Max Floss comes in. And what do we find? This. Okay, so as the scale, the x-axis goes from left to right, you're going from people who are very low in interpersonal trust, and to the right are people who are very high in interpersonal trust. And the anthropomorphized messenger is not changing much. The human messenger, as trust goes up, is seen as more persuasive. That's good. That just tells us our stimuli aren't crazy. As people get higher in their liking for people, the human messenger, the implicit human messenger, is more persuasive, and that's good. The interesting phenomenon is over to the left. These people who are low in interpersonal trust on the far left, they were much more likely to believe that Max Floss was an effective product if it was delivered by talking dental floss than if it was delivered by a human being. Why? Well, because we said when the human being said, this is Max Floss, they thought, yeah, you're a human being and you're scum and you're just saying that to sell me something and I'm never buying your dental floss ever. However, if Max Floss says, I'm a really good product, you're like, oh, well, you sound great, Max. I guess I'll pick you up at the store a little later. The reason we ran that study is that's the usual way it's done. The product usually speaks on its own behalf. That does, however, lead to some inference problems for us in the study. There are what are called confounds. As I'm moving anthropomorphized to non-anthropomorphized, moving at the same time as that, confounded with it, is whether the ad uses first person or third person. And in Max Floss, you can see the messenger, the anthropomorphized version, you can see the messenger where the human messenger is off screen, out of view. So studies 2 and 3 are meant to clean up the process and look a little more at the process. So clean up the design and look at the process. So here's study 2. We're still going to measure interpersonal trust. In the anthropomorphized version, the lamp is talking to you about Philips last forever, these light bulbs that last 30 years where you have to put them in your will. I'm older, you have to think about these things. So now you'll see later when I show you the results, we actually had 2 versions of this. We had another version of the lamp where the lamp is actually standing just like the guy is talking, so because we were measuring degrees of humanity. But you know, we have the lamp talks about how great these Philips light bulbs are, or the guy talks about how great the Philips light bulbs are. We measure interpersonal trust, and yep, the same pattern of results. At the low end, people who think other people are scum, when this very nice looking young guy tells you about Philips light bulbs, you think, no, that's ridiculous. They're going to break. They don't save energy. I don't believe a word that you guys are saying. If the lamp told you that, well, that's probably true. I'm going to go right out and buy one of these things, even though they're $30. Now, what about on the far end, where I really believe in interpersonal other humanity? It starts to look like the human messenger is more persuasive. Yes, it appears to be headed that way, but that's not a statistically significant difference yet. We're not picking it up. All right. Now, what about the mediation? Yes. In the intervening step, when we ask you, do you think that this lamp has your well-being at heart and stuff like that? And you have to be careful how you ask that, because some of them, it seems a weird question. But you just sort of ask, what's the goodwill associated with this messenger? Did they have your well-being at heart? Reverse coded? Were they just telling you this to sell more things? And we ask about the lamp if you got the lamp, or you ask about the young guy if you have the young guy. And sure enough, the low interpersonal trust thought the lamp had their well-being at heart, but they thought that the young man was just lying to them for his own goodwill, for his own benefit. And if you check statistically, the effect on persuasion works through the goodwill measure. So it's not, if you put goodwill into the model, the effect of the initial manipulation goes away. So the reason anthropomorphism is affecting people's judgment is via their perceived goodwill. All right, so let's just do the last message, and then we'll go to some questions around it. Here we tried to make the effect turn on a little bit more for the high trusters and also turn it off. So same sort of thing. The coffee cup is going to tell you about Cafe Direct Coffee, or the nice looking guy is going to tell you about the coffee. no confounds in the study, and we get the same effect again. But another thing we did in the study is we changed how much effort you should put into processing it. It was either going to come and start up in your hometown right by you, and there were not a lot of people we were surveying, so your opinion really matters. And we thought we could do in that high attentiveness condition is finally get the high trusters who are just blithely going through life not paying attention to pay some more attention. Oh, this is really going to affect me a lot. I should probably think pretty carefully. And the low trusters would as well. We also created another one, which is this is going to open in another city not near you at all. It's barely in the works. We're not entirely sure about it. We're asking a zillion people. And we thought this would maybe soften the wariness of the low trusters. And that's what we get. You've seen this pattern a lot before. This is in the high attentiveness condition. And we replicate the effect with the low trusters. They're more persuaded by the anthropomorphized messenger. Finally, though, these effects on the right-hand side become significant. The high trusters are like, a coffee cup? I'm not listening to a coffee cup. However, people, I do believe people and I trust them. So we get the crossover. In the low attentiveness condition, I know that this looks like there's effects, but there's nothing here. The variance is very high, and so this is flat. In the low attentiveness condition, all the effects go away. Nobody pays any attention to the messenger. Nobody discounts anything. Okay, so what do we know about all this? What form of anthropomorphism was this? Was this metaphor? No, probably not. They're attributing things like goodwill and credibility to these anthropomorphized messengers. But I think that this is that middle level, non-conscious application of things. In other words, I don't think that the low trusters, if I pointed out these effects to them, would say, yeah, damn right, I'm not listening to a person, but the muffin did indeed make some excellent points. I don't think they're going to say that. I think they're going to go, whoa, wow, that's weird that I did that. No, I don't think the muffin is genuinely real. It's happening outside conscious awareness. There's a lot, we think a lot about these things. The only way humans can behave as seemingly competently and rationally as they do is if we do a lot of stuff offline, non-consciously. It lets us process a lot of information. People's behavior gets a little peculiar in these ways when the part of the brain that gets turned on misapplies otherwise useful thought processes. So when you're at a party or otherwise behaving socially or somebody's trying to talk you into something, you are experienced in applying all the social rules to these things without having to go, if P then Q. If he speaks, I should discount. You don't do that. You just kind of process along. And what we're picking up in these anthropomorphism studies is by giving non-human things some humanity, people pull over accidentally their social rules for interacting with them. And it leads to these peculiar beliefs that muffins are more persuasive than people, or in our studies, coffee cups, dental floss, and lamps are more persuasive than people. Is there real anthropomorphism? Have we seen it where it isn't an error? I don't think we've seen a lot of it yet. It probably works. Certainly anthropologists have studied anthropomorphism for years. It is almost impossible to think about God or gods without anthropomorphizing. As one philosopher put it, how would you pray to a God who isn't anthropomorphized? What would that even mean? It just doesn't, you have to give God something human-like in order to deal with it. Animal welfare has found some interesting effects. Most of us anthropomorphize our pets, and mostly that's good. Although it turns out that people who anthropomorphize pets react very negatively to the pet behaving badly because the pet intentionally messed with them and harmed them. I've told you not to do this. You knew I had a horribly long day. You're just unkind and insensitive to me. That's real anthropomorphism, I think. And I think as we go further and further into robotics and computing, we're going to start dealing with real anthropomorphism, not accidental lifting over of social rules and norms, but where we actually give it some real humanity. And this I'm really interested in, because so far in almost all of the studies on anthropomorphism, there's a case where the entity is not anthropomorphized, and then either by giving something a look or asking people just to think about it in human terms, we have the anthropomorphized condition, this sort of present absent. I think as we now start going into true anthropomorphism, we can start to ask how human, from not at all human to fully human, where does it land on the continuum? So we can talk about effects of degree of anthropomorphism, and we can start to get more categorical and say, which traits did we give it? And there's work on dehumanization. I sometimes mention it in my managing and organizations class. Research on dehumanization, when you start talking to service employees like they're not quite human, tends to go in one of two directions. There's animalistic dehumanization, where we still think that they can hurt and feel, we just think they're a little stupid. And then there's robotic dehumanization, where they don't think they can feel at all, but they can think pretty well like a real person. And we ask different things of that. So that's taking humanity away from people. And think about the way racism and hostility to other people go. We do take humanity away from people sometimes, but not fully. Can we go the other direction and ask, what are we adding to animals? What are we adding to the little devices in our hands as they start to see in more human? What do we think it can do? Can it feel? Can it think? Is it kind? Because, and this cycles back to credibility research, there's some work on the traits associated with humanity. And interestingly enough, badness is one of the highest level traits. In other words, we attribute being kind of evil to ourselves, but not other people. We think that failure is in some ways a very high-end trait, and we say it all the time. When Tiger Woods got himself in all that sort of trouble and he did his public mea culpa, I'm so sorry, what does he say? What do all the stars say when they mess up? I'm only human. We tend to think of men as naughtier than women, but we also give men a more exalted status than women. Being bad may be a more human trait. So maybe we think anthropomorphized entities are generally quite benign, and that might affect their credibility as well. So that's where we're going with all of this. We've started with simple print ads and fairly simplified print ads, simplified anthropomorphized entities, physical products as we've done things too. We're going to move more dynamic, and we're going to move more in the direction of anthropomorphized diseases, because clearly in the domain of health, these are not just cute, creative executions of ads. They could have very serious implications for whether people pay attention to them or not and implement them. So that's what I've got on all of these. Thank you very much. We have a few minutes for questions.
So have you thought, possibly as another confound to your study, sorry to bring this up, but the difference between anthropomorphized objects selling something else versus it selling itself? Yeah,
that was the one that was really haunting. Max Floss was selling itself. So in the anthropomorphized condition, not only is it first person, but he's also selling himself, whereas in the non-anthro, the implicit speaker is talking about him. So that's why we went over and had the lamp and the guy talk about the light bulb to try to get a grip on that. But yeah, it's the land of confounds in these things because they move together with this. Other? Go ahead.
So you showed various levels. One is the object being anthropomorphized, and the other one is to discount the factor of being human. Mm-hmm. The change in or attributes of behavior of trustworthy or non-trustworthy individuals, would you say is because of effect number one, where an object is amorphized, or the discounting of the factor that human element is not there?
We think it's coming from the fact that we took the human out. So it's the trigger. It's not like they think the muffin is kind of fun and nice, as much as if you take the humanity away, that trigger that says, oh wait, I shouldn't accept at face value what I'm hearing, I need to doubt, I need to turn it, and it's humanity that triggers the doubt process for the low trusters that do that. It never gets turned on at all for the high trusters, well, not at all, but it's hard to turn on that doubting system for the high trusters at all. And if you do, then they doubt the talking thing, because that's weird, it's a talking thing. But yeah, humanity tends to be the distressing thing.
Do you ever go directly to the creators of the advertisement and ask them why they do what they do?
Yeah, and they say, I don't know, it was cute. So, you know, yeah, people in my class know I no longer tell people what I do for a living on airplanes, because they start in, all their hatred for you gets stuck on me. The idea that I would teach marketing or management to MBA students, everybody who is hostile to business starts yelling at me. Like, oh, those people are horrible. So I tell people that I sell insurance, and then I say, you know, most people don't have enough coverage, and then they become interested in Hemispheres magazine and use it, seriously. But what they will commonly ask me if I make the mistake of letting them know is they say, why all the silliness in ads, you know, intruding on my screen? Why doesn't somebody just come out and make a simple, direct argument in favor of the product or service they're selling? And the answer is those ads are wildly ineffective, because people immediately think, oh, you're trying to persuade me, you're on that team in the debate, and I'm on the other team in the debate. So the clarity of the message causes people to counter-argue like mad. So because people are quite combative, particularly in Western cultures, they're quite combative with commercial speech. So what you do is you try to present your message in a way that gets in the way or disrupts the counter-argument. So they just say these ads work pretty well because you're so busily watching the fact that a muffin daughter is arguing with a muffin father, you end up hearing, oh, you know, Pam is new and improved and works better, and you're like, you don't counter-argue that at all. You're busy watching the drama between teenage daughter and clueless dad, and you forget to counter-argue, and that's why they're doing and that's what they do with most ads.
It looked like in those charts where they were showing on the y-axis persuasion, on the right x-axis
Like those sort of things?
trustworthiness. Yeah. Is there a reason why in there that typically the lower interpersonal trust has a higher average persuadability? In almost every situation, if you took the average of human versus anthropomorphized message, the average is higher on the persuasion average is higher on low interpersonal trust, which seemed pretty counterintuitive.
Yeah, it's being pulled up. I can't remember if that main effect is true, but in the presence of an interaction, it's hard to interpret a main. But I think that that's non-significant, that difference. But if it's coming, you do find it surprising that the low trusters would ultimately be more persuaded than the high trusters. So actually it's fine, but I don't think it's significant. So this would be the average here. So that's good. Yeah.
Can you, do you think there's any sort of cultural difference between how comfortable people are with anthropomorphized objects? In Japan, people love robots that serve you tea, or dance with you, or play games with you. But in America, a lot of my friends say that, okay, those are a little bit creepy. Reminds me of the Terminator. I'm not gonna have one in my house.
Yes.
So,
I think so too, but it's not from my own research, it's from what I've read. There's this phenomenon they call the uncanny valley, which is if you're looking at how appealing a robot is, as things go closer and closer to humanity, we like it better and better. And then when it gets very close to but isn't quite human, the evaluation falls off. And then when it's human again, it comes back up. And this dip in the evaluation is the valley. that they're talking about. And it comes from, it's uncanny, it's creepy, it's really human, but not quite human. And it appears the uncanny valley is deeper and bigger in Western cultures, than in particular in Japan, where people are on board. Like, this is a blast. What else can we get these things to do? Which is why you find that vending machine wandering around in Japan, whereas in America they would feel like they'd probably bring criminal charges that it assaulted me. So there appear to be cultural differences, but I don't know this from my own research. It will matter more and more as we, the things in our hands are you start asking it questions and talking to it, and they do things like learn. So that's a little human. And so, yeah, go ahead.
I'm interested if you have a perspective on which industries find that this type of advertising is more impactful. 'Cause anecdotally, I think that where I see a lot of this is in actually pretty low risk personal care products like Charmin or something.
Scrubbing bubbles.
Yeah, so you'd almost wonder how it would have an impact on something where there's a higher risk, like automobile advertising, vaccine advertising.
When we went through, we just sort of started Google. We just went looking all around. Our intuitions were the same as yours. Our findings were the same as your intuitions. They tend to be more these lower risk, high frequency products that people buy. And I think it's a case of pity the poor advertising creative who has to come up with an ad this year that's somehow special and different than the last 100 other ads for it. And so they've just kind of grabbed at this as a mechanism to do stuff. It can also seem not serious enough for, you want the ad, the affect in the ad, the style of the ad to align with the brand image or the corporate image. So if you were selling something very serious, it seems odd to have a talking thing. But, and the reason, we started on the health direction and then went this way first because we had to learn more about what was going on. All these health messages, which are very serious, have these anthropomorphized entities in them. So I don't know why that is. So we're just getting into, 2007, Jennifer Rocker published a paper, Jennifer's at Stanford, which used the word anthropomorphism, but just in passing, and she was looking at the fact that we think of brands as being exciting or rugged and the like. But she was just using it as a metaphor. We've really not dug into anthropomorphism very carefully on the commercial sides of things, and we're still, like I said, we started to study health, and then we realized we didn't quite know what was going on, so we stepped back into this research, which is fairly direct and simplistic, and even it's been interesting to try to get a grip on why it's happening. Hey, thanks for coming, you guys.